morning, hur mår du? All that. And did you have a good time at Ålesund and Trondheim? Good. Well, you're part of the heat wave then, because our Norwegian friends are a little staggering under the heat wave. I think it's broken because there was this thing called rain that they occasionally have that cooled off every place. And when we go to Oslo, it may be still warm and sunny, but not so much. I'm going to give you just an introduction to the capital of Norway. We've already seen some extents of this vast country, but now we're going to the very modernizing capital city, and this is the new Bjørnvik district of the capital city. We will be docking actually near there. This is the new skyline of Oslo. It's not a very big city. It's about 700,000 people, but that's very big for Norway. And of course, we've already come all the way around from Copenhagen up and around to Trondheim up here, Ålesund. Then we're going to Kristiansand down on the very tip of the southern coast. And now we're on the day, tomorrow we'll be in Kristiansand, then we'll be in Oslo. But again, we've only gone, maybe halfway all the way to Nordkapp. And it gets colder and more wilderness all the way up there, many, many islands, but very little lowland. And southern Norway has a lot of lush farms and many towns, and so that's the settled and the developed part of Norway. And then we're going to come up from the Skagerrak passage of going into Denmark, but up into the Østland and the Oslo fjord. So you can see Oslo is actually very well hidden, and this has meant it's as a capital, it has been fairly well protected over the centuries by its location. And if we come in, we'll see it's all pretty much lowland. There's no more fjords and none of the spectacular scenery we've been seeing, but you get the settlements and industry as you go into Oslo. But it's fairly flat land and a kind of an archipelago on its own. And as is the way of Norway, there are lots of marinas and boats and population here. So this is the capital snugged up in the top of the fjord. It's a fjord without many high mountains, but we'll be coming to the new Bjørnvik area. There's the National Opera House, and then the main city is nearby, and Oslo is particularly convenient to visit because you can walk off the pier and go see many things. The concert halls and the royal palace is up here near the theater, and so if we are docked somewhere along in this stretch in the Pipervika, they call it, that's the area where it's convenient for our visit. But Oslo itself is a name, it's an Old Norse name, and they don't know really where it came from. There was, in the prehistory and in the oral tradition, it was said that a raven came and settled, sent by Odin the god, the one-eyed wise man. And in all of this mythology, the raven is often a messenger for the gods. And I've showed you some of this. Thor, the mighty warrior god. And Norse mythology is so rich and deep that you can truly get lost in it, which is one of the pleasures of literature. These are called the Norns, which were the women spiritualists who would weave together the society and the messages from the gods and the various tales. And one of them, Idun, would give apples to the warriors that would guarantee their immortality if they died in battle and went to Valhalla. So this kind of a rich cultural life is very much in the contemporary Norway and the rest of Scandinavia, so that the people learn this and they appreciate it, even though it's a misty past compared to the busy lives of our modern world. But in some places we've been, you've seen the old timber and sod roof houses. There's a museum outside of Oslo which has taken some of the real historic ones like this and put them in a setting so you can appreciate the kind of accommodations you might have had if you visited here 1,000 years ago. This is Harald Hardrada, who was said to be the founder of Oslo. He chose it as a strategic stronghold in his many adventures around the world, in that he had first gone east to Russia, and then he went down to Constantinople and became the chief of the Viking Varangian guards who guarded the palaces of Constantinople before it was taken by the Muslims and became Islamic. But then he came back to Norway, and then he happened on a long holiday to invade England. And so famously, his army were defeated at Stamford Bridge in 1066 by the forces of Edward the Bald, who then was distracted because William the Conqueror came in and took the land of the UK. And so the Norse heritage is very much entwined in English history, of course. But I'll go back to just this side. The Queen of Denmark, Queen Margrethe, who was famously wise and influential, and was really the regent. She got married at age 10, had a few children, but her husband died, so she appointed and crowned, first of all, her young son, who then also died, and then she appointed her nephew. So she reigned for quite a while via her family relations, but her historic achievement was to propose what's called Kalmar Union, which included what's now Sweden, Norway, Denmark, and all various islands, including a token rule over Iceland and the western provinces, islands that have been taken, Faroe Islands, by the various Norse settlers. This lasted until 1523, when there was a lot of disputes, and part of modern Scandinavian history comes from the resentment of the Norwegians, especially, against the domination of the Danes and the Swedes, and so this is sort of a neighborhood dispute that goes on, and I've made the mistake of trying to speak what they call samtal, which is our common simplified Norse, so you can go anywhere. Whereas everywhere in Norway, Sweden, even Denmark, there are local dialects, and the one thing they don't want to hear is sort of pidgin Scandinavian. But it's the continuing heritage. But in Oslo, during the Kalmar Union, they started to build this Aker Castle, which is a historic monument now, but very much the fortress that protect the access right up to the fjord and the town of Oslo. This has defenses against pirate vessels like this one to this day. But you can go in and see the towers and the throne room, but it's no longer occupied by the royal family. They have their own modern palace right downtown. The Danes ran Norway for quite a few centuries, and so Christian IV came and renamed Oslo after himself, I guess, and called it Christiania. That was the name under the Danish rule until the Norwegian nation became independent in 1905, and then returned the Old Norse name of Oslo to the city. It was not a very big city at that time, but it's developed tremendously in the last number of decades because of the wealth of the oil and other industries of Norway. But the last battle that was had here, let's say, was a short one when the German army and navy came in to take Oslo and Norway in 1940. And there was a modern coastal defenses on the little island of Oskarborg, just south of the city center, where the commander at the time, Vigard Christian Eriksen, without getting permission, fired the guns on the German fleet that came in. And as he said, either I will be decorated or I will be court-martialed, but fire. And so he took the Krupp guns, actually made in Germany, and also torpedoes, and sank the Blücher. This was a major battleship, cruiser, killed about 800 sailors aboard, and that gave time for the royal family and many of the political leaders to flee, and most of them went to the UK, where they led the resistance in Norway throughout World War II. Meanwhile, the stormtroopers came in and took over all the cities in Norway, and then wanted Norway to be an ally in the Great Third Reich. But of course, there was a lot of resistance all over the country, famous sabotage and all kinds of actions all up and down Norway. And then it returned peacefully without much damage in peacetime to be the city it is today. So this is the old harbor, which is full of some historic boats and monuments in the town. I'll show you a few of them because even though Oslo has grown tremendously in this last couple of decades, it still has some medieval churches and buildings and historic landmarks. But it's mostly noted as the political center for Norway. So this is the Radhus, the city hall, which is a bit of a brick block, but it has a big plaza, and depending on where we dock, and if there's a shuttle bus, that's where the center of the town is there, and you can walk to many different attractions. They seem to always have statues in the naked. I don't know what they do in the winter. They probably put sweaters on them just to make it seem more comfortable. But again, here's the city hall, which is a bit of a brutish modern building compared to the even more brutish ones they're building now. But they had some classical designs, the old opera house, and the National Theater, which is dedicated to Henrik Ibsen, who's the great playwright and author of Norway. And to this day, his play, The Doll's House, if anybody's seen it, is the most performed piece of theater in the world in many translations. He's running a second with Shakespeare in that regard. Our trip there is blessed by, we have an overnight. So you could go to the theater or go out and see what's going on. Or you could stop by here and pick up your prize. That's the Nobel Peace Center. I hear they got extras, but I don't want to go into that. And then you have the classic Nordic cathedral, and here is the Royal Palace, which is not so big compared to some palaces that I wish I could live in. But it has the same thing like in Copenhagen. We'll see this also, the changing of the guard, ceremonial functions. And the king is still here, King Harald the fourth, who is the longest serving monarch in the world now. Now he's 89, but he's still pretty strong and very vocal. He happens to be also the only royal who won an Olympic gold medal in his younger days as a sail captain on the racing teams. And so this is a royalty gossip of the young prince Hakon, who will succeed him, married the princess Mette-Marit, who is a gracious host and very popular because she was a commoner, and she actually came from Kristiansand. And she had a let's say, scandalous party life as a young woman, and she had a baby out of wedlock, and she hung out with the wrong crowd to suddenly fall in love with the prince who met her at a party, etc. You can read all about it in the Norwegian scandal sheets, but she's sort of like Princess Diana, very popular in the nation, and will be queen eventually. But of course, what they say here, if you plan to marry a Viking, be aware that your wants will be different from his wants. You'll want to buy a house, he'll want to buy a boat. Anybody have that problem? I don't. I live on my boat. Anyway, this is modern Oslo, which is, again, because of the oil industry and the industriousness of all kinds of things in Greater Norway, has built up the capital to be a modernist place, and the whole new districts and suburbs and highways and all the sort of thing. But most famously, they built the National Opera House, which is meant to be sort of like the mountains and the peaks and such, and it's built right into the water so that it has plazas, and so it was meant to be open to the public. The only problem is in the snow and the ice, people tend to slide right off into the bay. So they've had to put barriers on it. And you may have read about the seals that wanted to come up and lie around on it in the summer, and they had to finally remove them because people were falling in the water taking pictures of them. But anyway, that's open. That's, again, not too far from where we're going to dock. And another thing that's right off there is another modern art sculpture. It's called She Lies by an artist named Monica Bonavicini. But anyway, it's meant to symbolize the ice and the snow and the mountains of Norway. And also nearby in this new district, they have the new Edvard Munch museum. But people call it the barcode. All these new buildings, they look like they're about to be scanned. But anyway, Norwegian culture, Edvard Munch was the great emotional painter that you're probably all familiar with now. He has his own dedicated museum. And so I'll just show you a couple of his pictures here, the vampire. And this sort of brings out the, let's say, the darker and more sometimes psychotic feelings of Norway. Here's the mermaid. Again, she left her sweater at home. But this is the most famous of all the paintings, and you may have noticed or read a decade or more ago, thieves went into the museum and took it and carried it out on camera and put it in their car and drove away. They found it later, but this is repeated often in iconography of this emotional state. In fact, I saw the other day, they make trolls with that same sort of look on their face now, just for souvenirs. But if you take a tour of Oslo, you also go out into this, broader woodland, and there's a lot of parks and space in Oslo. But this is the Vigelands Park, which was the dedicated work of the sculptor Vigeland, who for decades built this area up into a kind of a formal sculpture garden, and so it's still quite remarkable. His figurative work and sort of Norse iconography that's in the park out there. Here they are, staring at the sun, wondering how long it's going to be up. But this is one of the beautiful things to see, the whole park. And then I believe some of the tours go out to the famous Holmenkollen ski jump, which is one of the biggest in the world back when they had snow. Now, of course, from Oslo, you go north to Lillehammer and all these higher mountain areas where you have ski jumps hosted by trolls. And another thing in Oslo is the museums that are over on the Osberg eastern side of the city. It's maybe an hour to get there from downtown, but these are the museums of the ships and the Kon-Tiki, and there's a building built just for the great Osberg Viking ship, which was one of the now many burial ships that they found and then carefully restored. And they built this building just to preserve it and exhibit it. So it's quite a stunning piece of boatmanship. And of course, the Norse in general and the Vikings and specifically were famous raiders and the terror of Northern Europe for so many centuries, about 800 till they settled down in the 1000 and so. But in brief, they went from Norway and Sweden and Denmark all around Europe, including to the Caspian and the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. They first came, of course, to have a holiday in what is now Britain. And any Yorkshiremen in the audience? Because the name York originally is Jarvik, Jarl being an Earl of the Bay. And so when the Danish Vikings came over and took that part of what's now Britain, they named the bay for the Earl. Now, curiously, the little town of New York, where I'm based, is also the same thing. It has a Norse name. New York is actually a Viking name, typical for the business community there, I guess. But anyway, other explorers have gone out. Famously, Fridtjof Nansen, who built the first icebreaker. Well, it didn't break very well, but it was a hull that was so thickly built it could ride up on the ice. So he went for years actually up in the Arctic and was the first explorer up there. He didn't get to the North Pole, but this ship came back from being locked in ice for a year or more, and then it was replaced, of course, by steel vessels. This is all wooden, but one of the museums on this area houses this great famous ship, and you can even drive it around the building, if not the parking lot. But that's one of the historic vessels. in a kind of succession from the early Norse traditions to Nansen and also Thor Heyerdahl. There's a Norwegian explorer who specialized in recreating historic vessels. And this was his reed boat that he made in Iraq and to show that those historic vessels could go all around the Indian Ocean, the Arabian Sea. And so they have a reproduction of it. The one he built kind of got soggy and fell apart. Then he burned it in protest to whatever war was going on. So they rebuilt it and put it in the museum there in Oslo. He's most famous for his Kon-Tiki expedition, which took balsa logs from South Peru and South America, and then he tried to prove that ancient people could have sailed from South America to Polynesia on the tide and the currents and the wind, which he did, except that later research showed that through DNA research showed that they actually went the other way. The Polynesians probably ended up sailing to South America. But anyway, his vessel Kon-Tiki, which was very famous at the time, is restored in this museum. So you can imagine going on that cruise for months and months. Anyway, this tradition is kind of an energetic Norwegian exploration and scientific inquiry goes on. But now it's mostly expedition ships like this looking for more gas and oil. So the North Sea resources have been the enrichment of Norway and also now providing an alternative to Russian supplies to most of Europe. And the nation has built a fleet of, these are the Hurtigruten ferry boats that are very large and comfortable, and they go all the way up to the North Cap of Norway, and they tied the country together in a way that was never possible before modern shipping and airplanes and roads and all that. So the places we've been are no longer so isolated. For centuries, they were out in the middle of the edge of the world, and they got few visitors, and unless they were ready to go be a Viking and sail and go places, they were not really tied to the rest of the country. Now the country is so prosperous, it's building more roads, tunnels, the ship tunnels that I described the last time, where ships will go through a mountain to avoid the weather or such. But here's a town up in there, Lofoten, where they have put in a good proper football pitch right on an island. So that's modern Norway with all the conveniences. But as a nation, they're very proud and also have had a history of being dominated by the Swedes or the Danes or invaded by the Germans. And now you can go see they're being invaded by Burger King and Starbucks and all these other things that they just don't quite really want, but they get it anyway. And this is in the far north. And on National Day, people get dressed up and they have a great pride. You see, Norway probably has more flags per capita flying than any other country I've ever been in. We're not going up there, but the north is kind of getting a lot of attention, first of all, because it has accelerating warming, so the ice caps and the glaciers are melting precipitously, and the Arctic sea ice is breaking up. And so this is where you can watch the world changing a bit. The further north you go, the more accelerated the temperature changes are. And I worked on a ship all through the Arctic area and went the Northwest Passage and part of the Northeast. But here's a polar bear wondering whether he needs a sweater anymore. But this is now a strategic problem, because with our problems in Ukraine and the Russian assertions of authority and building their northern fleet and their Baltic fleet, this has put Norway on a bit of a guard. It's been a NATO member for many decades now, but this is the river that divides Norway and Russia above Finland, up in the Finnmark area it's called. And so this has suddenly become a closed border. Same thing with Finland. They've stopped any passage of the border because they were getting spies and forced refugees coming across the border. So this is where we are today, with NATO being added to with the Baltic states. And so the outcome of this attack on Ukraine has meant that the traditional enemies of Norway, Sweden and Denmark, they're all part of NATO pact now, and they are coordinating their air and land and sea resources to stand guard. So now there's, unfortunately, mobilization of the military, which is, Scandinavia has been a peaceful place for decades, if not a century or more, and so this is a very unsettling at best, but if you're not prepared, then bad things can happen, even though it seems sort of folly that the Russians have such a weak economy and they're short of their own people, so I don't think they'll ever invade, but they can do a lot of damage anyway. So this is up in the North Sea and the Arctic on watch, so that British and Norwegian vessels are patrolling up there and keeping track of movements. But anybody who wants to mess with Norway has a serious problem, because, so this is the warning. And you can see them on guard almost anywhere you go, so just watch out. Anyway, this is such a great country. We've seen quite a bit of it. We'll have a visit in Oslo, and then we'll be going back down to sunny, warm Denmark. But the spirit of this nation is really outdoors. And even though Oslo can be kind of a noisy big city now, everybody goes out to go hiking and camping, and these are public cabins up in the mountains, so you can go hiking and there's always a place to stay, if just a bunk bed. And so the youth of Norway have this tremendous heritage, but they have also natural resources and a healthy lifestyle, and they're always out there for adventure, I'd say. So yeah, I hope we can keep up with them, especially up in the high mountain area. And with that, I wish you a great trip to Oslo, and on we go in the world to see more wonders. Thank you very much, and have a great trip in Oslo. Thank you.